Hello, I'm Dr. G, and today we'll be talking about how to do a lovebird beak trim. Now, most birds usually do not need a beak trim, but some of them obviously do, like Fiona here. Now, some of the good reasons to do trim a beak are usually because it's deformed in one way or another. Either following a trauma because the bird cage fell and the tip got fractured or chipped, or often it's because they got bitten by another bird. We see this often in lovebirds. Sometimes following a sickness like beak and feather disease, heart or liver disease, sinusitis. We see quite a few beak mites in budgerigars. Sometimes they even get beak tumors. Now, unfortunately, we still see a lot of cases of malnutrition and sometimes congenital malformations as well. Often the beak will wear unevenly, either because of lack of proper chewing toys or abrasive surfaces to wipe the beak. Now, beak trimming should always be done by a competent, well-equipped avian veterinarian or trained personnel, because the beak is a very vascularized structure that will bleed if improperly trimmed or trimmed too short. It will also be very painful for the bird if it's not done right. So if you do attempt to trim a bird beak, be gentle and very patient, one layer at a time. Now, before trimming a bird beak, as in the case of Simba here, it's very important to know what a normal beak should look like to evaluate how much can be trimmed away without damaging the structures below or causing pain to the bird. Some birds will need their beak trimmed every 3 weeks to a few times a year, while others need it only once in their lives or never. Some beaks will recover a normal shape, while others will remain deformed. With severe beak deformities, we are only maintaining the shape to allow proper feeding. Now, normally I use 3 things to do bird beaks. I'll use a handheld Dremel, a nail clipper with a straight cutting edge, not an angled edge. This allows better visualization of the cut to be made, and some rounded tip nail files for the bird's safety. I like to use a lightweight cordless handheld Dremel with variable speed and with a conical grinding stone at the tip. That gives me a lot of control for fine movements to trim the bird beak. I usually use the speed from 2 to 4 on a scale of 10 for most beaks. If you go higher than this, the speed is so fast you can easily overheat the beak. You can hear this. Very loud. So usually a speed of 4 is good for larger birds, and I can even stop it with my fingers without getting hurt or burnt. And a speed of 2 is good for most smaller birds. I will use the flat side of the stone, and also I can stabilize my hand and use the tip for more precision. Some will use smaller or lighter rotary tools for the same purpose. The secret is to prevent overheating the beak by alternating areas every few seconds and trimming it one fine layer at a time to prevent overgrinding the beak. Since the vibrations are not ideal for very small birds, I will avoid the Dremel and use only my nail files and clippers as needed. Now today we'll be trimming Fiona's beak. Her lower bill is deviated laterally to the right and the upper one to the left, and it's also thickened, as you can see here. This is what she'll look like once I'm done. Now with Fiona's beak, I use the tip of my Dremel to delimitate a fine line on the lower beak where I'll thin it out, and eventually I'll use my clippers to cut it. If I try to cut it too soon while it's thick, I'm risking splitting the lower beak in half, so it's very important to thin out that area before using the clippers. So I'll thin out the upper beak as well, where I'll clip it as well later on. So I will change the angle of my Dremel to be able to access all the sides, stabilizing my hand. It's important not to block the bird's nostrils as you're doing this, and to check the temperature of the beak regularly to make sure it's not overheating. So that's starting to thin out quite well. With Fiona, it takes about 15 minutes to do her beak, to bring it back down to normal size. If it will be beyond 15 to 20 minutes or so, I will try to trim the beak in different sessions. So you see she's tolerating this quite well. There's no bleeding. I'll cut across right there, do a fine line. She's already looking much better. I'll finish thinning out the tip to give it a normal shape. I'm checking for heat. As the dust is falling, I'm blowing it away to make sure it's not going in the eyes, or I'll flush the eyes out afterwards with saline if needed. Oh, she's starting to look pretty good. And there we go. I'll use my nail file to flatten out the lower beak here. And I'll use it as well to thin out the upper bill, where it wasn't wearing out normally because the beak was deviated laterally. I'll also put the upper beak inside the lower beak to have better access to that fine edge on the lower beak there. This doesn't really hurt them because both beaks are mobile in birds, compared to mammals where it's only the lower mandible that can move. There we go. This is Fiona before, and that's what she's going to look like now afterwards. Much better. As we can see, it was quite bad before. Almost perfect afterwards. Bye-bye, Fiona. See you next time.